My name is Peggy Burr, and I am the museum director here at the Bates County Museum in Butler, Missouri. I'm standing in front of a mural that depicts the Battle of Island Mound. That battle marked a turning point in a lot of people's minds and in how the battles were going to be fought and how soldiers were going to be recruited. In October of 1862, the first colored volunteers marched into Bates County from Kansas. That was the first time that the public had seen black soldiers marching. And believe me, word spread across the county in a hurry. These men had come into the county to take on the guerrillas that were at Hog Island, which is a marshy space along the Meridocene River. It was a stronghold for the guerrillas, and they were told that there were about 400 guerrillas on the island. The troop that marched in of the 1st Kansas Colored Volunteer Infantry had 220 to 240 men that day. So, not knowing for sure the size of the enemy that they were going to be engaging, runners were sent to Paola to perhaps bring reinforcements. Unfortunately, reinforcements did not arrive before the battle ensued. When the troop had marched into the county, they commandeered a home owned by Enoch and Christiana Toothman. Now, the Toothman family had moved to Bates County sometime in early 1860 from West Virginia. They had 7 children, 2 sons and 5 daughters. It's believed that the 2 sons both were involved in guerrilla activities. Enoch we have no information on, but can safely assume that his thinking was that of his sons. Now, in May of 1862, there was an ambush on a foraging party of soldiers garrisoned in Butler, and men were killed. Later that summer, one of the Toothman boys were arrested and taken to Fort Lincoln in Kansas, which is not far from Mound City. So the Toothman boy was there that October when the troops marched into Bates County and came straight to his family home. We assume that was their target, although no records really indicate that. The men got busy and created barricades there. And during the course of settling in, that's when they dubbed the Toothman home Fort Africa. Time went on. There were a little bit of engagements, a little teasing and taunting with the guerrillas for the next day or so. Finally, on the 29th of October, it was critical for foraging to be done. The men needed food, the animals needed grains and so forth. So a party was sent out, and that's when it began a series of encounters that led to what is now known as the Battle of Island Mound. It was a turning point because the black soldiers fought valiantly. They were extremely courageous and brave in holding their ground. They were remembering their training. They were doing exactly what they had been trained to do. And up until that point in time, that was one of the arguments used in Washington City at the War Department then, that they did not believe that black men could be trained to hold their ground. They did not believe that they wouldn't turn and run in the course of battle. Island Mound proved that theory to be desperately wrong. These men not only stood their ground, but they stood their ground against an enemy that was mounted, and an enemy that each man would have been armed with multiple weapons, as was the trademark of the guerrillas. And they even maintained when it deteriorated to the point of hand-to-hand combat. This was a life or death struggle for them, and they knew that. The prairie was set on fire by the guerrillas, the smoke providing coverage. The 1st Kansas set a backfire to try and stop. I mean, it was a melee. It was confusion, and the winds had kicked up, and the circumstance for battle was bad. The mounds themselves are hilly and difficult to traverse, and so there were a lot of factors playing against all of the men involved. Finally, the battle ended. A draw of sorts, but certainly considered a victory for the 1st Kansas. This, as I said, was a turning point in the war. Casualties were such: there were 8 men killed, 1 white officer, 1 man who was a Cherokee, and then 6 of the 1st Kansas. The white officer was Captain Andrew Crew, and his body was taken back to Leavenworth to be buried. Graves were dug for the 7 other men just north of the Toothman family home. Sadly, we don't know exactly where that is, and to this day have not been able to determine where those graves might have been. Several men were wounded. There were 19 casualties. We often talk of the youth of these Civil War days and how young some of these men were. And one report is that of a 14-year-old boy by the name of Manuel Dobson, who was wounded in both arms. Now, fortunately, he survived. But I think the important thing to note there is he was only 14. And I think it serves us well to reflect on that. That's part of the human story of this whole circumstance. On the day after the battle is when the reinforcements arrived. And of course they made another attempt to go to Hog Island, and by that time all of the guerrillas were gone. They had disbanded and fled. And then finally on November 1st is when the soldiers left, and Christiana Toothman regained control of her home.